which it operates jointly with LG Energy Solution. The key motivation behind this move was once again the risk of a shock from customs tariffs. Renewed Made in America battery content rules in the US have complicated the debate over what counts as domestic, while Ontario's critical mineral waiver has increased process security. In addition, regional unions quickly closed the table with a 5-year wage peace protocol. The UAW's 2 strikes in the US were one of the most prominent examples of the consequences of this situation. Ultimately, Stellantis knows it won't have to pay extra taxes when it exports tons of cells to the US. That's because there are still loopholes in battery exports between Canada and the US, and the company is exploiting them to its advantage. In the technology arena, Amazon was the first to open the door. The Seattle-based giant quietly acquired a vast flat area just north of Calgary. The 460,000-metre distribution centre includes a test platform for autonomous trucks, a drone hub, and the region's first fully electric truck park. While the Snohomish project in Washington state has been stalled by environmental objections and a 2-year permit delay, Alberta has granted year-round approval. Wind credits have been activated on the energy side, and a carbon tax exemption has become a gift that will boost Amazon's ESG ratings. Additionally, the foreign content reporting requirement that recently took effect in the US exempts shipments originating in Canada, allowing the company to save time on customs declarations. This creates another type of overtime bonus for company employees. Microsoft, which has followed Amazon's lead, already had established software hubs in Vancouver and Toronto. However, its announced Northern Cloud Spine project has signaled a new call to action. The project document clearly states the goal of a sovereign cloud that will not be affected by any federal guidelines issued in Seattle. The infrastructure's data will not leave Canadian borders, and artificial intelligence models will be subject to Canadian courts. The company will spend $5 billion on this new backbone over 3 years to prevent brain drain. It has also sponsored an accelerated work permit support program. When Ottawa's immigration office promised approval within 2 weeks for highly skilled software developers, the first wave of developers moving from Silicon Valley to Vancouver described the international transition as easy, fast, and cost-free on their LinkedIn profiles. This migration is fully aligned with the remote work model that has been in place since the pandemic and is likely to accelerate as the US H-1B visa lottery is cancelled. In the fast service world, Burger King shifted its holding company headquarters to Europe a decade ago with its merger with Tim Hortons. However, its operational hub remained in Miami. Now, it too is shifting its focus to the Montreal-Longo corridor, announcing plans to build a $320 million product development laboratory and digital order training campus. Burger King management cited Montreal's university ecosystem as the biggest reason for the move, pointing to artificial intelligence-driven order prediction algorithms rather than low-value added jobs. While the state government is offering a 20% payroll tax credit, the New York office reported $12 million in relocation expenses during the same timeframe. According to the CFO, such a disparity is a clear response to a specific equation. The key phrase is that plans are made if regulations are not arbitrary. Examples from different sectors shed light on the broader context of this wave effect. Bell Canada and TELUS's $45 billion artificial intelligence data center networks are launching domestic twin competition against foreign hosting giants. SmartStop Self-S storage chain is closing its California operations after securing consecutive permits in Toronto. Canadian National Railway is strengthening New Brunswick's railways with an Atlantic-scale capacity move and plans to transfer from Halifax to Europe. This is because customs tariff deadlocks on the southern route are complicating matters. Spanish Ferrovial is nearly doubling its stake in Toronto's 407 ETR toll road, declaring it has broken free from the political risk spiral in the US highway market. And they're all singing the same tune. Uncertainty is the enemy of capital. Looking at the bigger picture, Canada's Federal Department of Finance confirmed in late April that the trade deficit had risen above $7 billion. Analysts attribute this to redirected demand, not weakness. This is because the import portfolio still carries US labels for parts, machinery, and electronics. However, export items are shifting back to European and Asian ports. Most new routes are Atlantic-bound from Halifax and St. John and Pacific-bound from Prince Robert. Meanwhile, on the US side, the quarterly changes in additional tariffs on metal-intensive products are making it impossible for companies to plan ahead. One side is waiting for budget talks before passing a law, while the other is reversing course the next morning by presidential order. This is precisely the situation investors want to avoid. Ottawa, on the other hand, has shifted to a permanent incentive model regardless of the scenario. It has introduced 3, 5, and 8-year predictable tax credits for electric vehicle battery cells, rare earth mineral processing, domestic artificial intelligence models, and clean energy storage. Additionally, it is committed to bringing in 10,000 highly skilled immigrants within 6 months through a Talent Fast-Ass Technology visa program. As capital seeks a safe haven through location and people, Canada is not disrupting its regular subsidy schedule. This reduces the variance in CFO's forecast models. The benefit of this balanced policy is that every investment shifting north triggers a domino effect of new investments. How does this shift alter the long-term map of North American industry? First, the concept of the secondary market has been reversed. A major manufacturer can now first amortize costs in Canada and then add secondary capacity in Texas or Ohio. Second, port corridors have been revitalized. Direct shipping to Europe and Asia via Halifax or Vancouver avoids the customs and permit uncertainties associated with the Mexico-Chicago transit system. Third, while AI regulations constantly raise the question of where is the data authority, servers registered in Canada give the impression that commercial secrets are secure. Finally, regarding the labor force shift, a software engineer stuck in the visa backlog in Silicon Valley is securing residency in Toronto for the same salary. A mechanical engineer leaving Seattle is finding work in a battery lab in Windsor, and a logistics planner tired of Miami is designing drone routes in Calgary. When we look beyond the surface of trade wars, the picture is clear. High tariffs are eroding profit margins, while unpredictable licensing conditions are thickening the red lines on balance sheet stress test charts. In this environment, global executives are placing Canada at the forefront of the risk diversification lane, keeping Washington on hold for consideration in a second phase if conditions calm down. If the Trump administration fails to regain the gas brake synchronization in protectionism, the current list of 5 companies could spark an exodus from the US, followed by a much longer caravan of migrants. China and Russia just shut the door on the US dollar completely. Not in theory, not someday. Now oil, minerals, microchips, they're trading in rubles and yuan. And while Washington demands China open its markets, American exporters are bleeding out. Small businesses are collapsing. And Asian central banks are sitting on a $25 trillion bomb are ready to dump. Trump thinks tariffs are leverage. But what if they're a loaded gun pointed at our own economy? Stick around because the fallout just hit Wall Street and your job might be next. How do you negotiate entry into someone else's house while deadbolting your own door from the inside? That's the paradox unfolding in Trump's latest trade talks. While Washington pushes Beijing to open its markets wider to US companies, it's enforcing a 145% tariff wall that's choking the flow of Chinese imports. The math isn't theoretical. Importers must now charge $18 just to break even on a $10 item, according to May 2025 pricing data. Scott Bassett insists it's about securing a great deal for America. But the White House is demanding concessions while offering fewer of its own. Even as US exports to China still top $140 billion and support over 500,000 jobs, this imbalance is deepening, not resolving. And here's where it gets stranger. If America truly believes access to Chinese consumers is critical, why does it keep making its goods more expensive, less competitive, and harder to sell overseas? That contradiction hasn't just weakened its leverage, it's put US businesses on defense before the first hand is even played. At the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, container volumes from Asia are down nearly 40% compared to last year. But this collapse isn't mirrored in China, it's redirected. According to April 2025 trade data, Chinese exports to the US cratered 20%. Yet total global exports rose 8.1% in dollar terms. Beijing has simply rerouted goods to Southeast Asia and Europe, both of which saw double-digit import increases. That rerouting didn't happen by luck. It was built into supply chain shifts already underway since 2023. The US hoped tariffs would freeze Chinese factories. Instead, China recalibrated, swapping one trade partner for 10 more. So the question becomes, did tariffs pressure Beijing or just reroute the trade lifeblood toward markets less hostile? And if China can rewire its shipping lanes this fast, what does that say about who's truly dependent on whom? China hasn't issued fiery press releases or headline-grabbing bans. Instead, it imposed a 125% tariff on US goods and walked away. The results speak louder than rhetoric. Shipments of US products into China have plummeted, with companies like Apple, McDonald's, and Starbucks suddenly facing a shrinking foothold in cities where they once dominated. S&P data shows American firms earned over $1.2 trillion in China last year, 4 times the size of the US trade deficit. Yet the consumer switch is already in motion. Luckin Coffee now rivals Starbucks in Tier 1 Chinese cities, and Huawei continues to claw back market share from iPhone sales. If this trend accelerates, American brands won't just lose revenue, they'll lose relevance. So here's the tension. Can US exporters withstand this market freeze? Or is Beijing quietly closing the window on their future? Pause, because this is the moment it all turns. The White House sees collapsing container shipments as victory, a supply squeeze designed to force China's hand. But what if that's not leverage but evidence of self-inflicted harm? In May 2025, Besant met with Chinese officials in Switzerland. Trump called it a very good meeting, yet no announcements followed, no frameworks, no memoranda. At the same time, small businesses across the US, from WSameco in Massachusetts to florists in Kentucky, have confirmed delays, cancellations, and unsustainable costs. WS Game, for example, lost $16 million in retailer orders and has $500,000 worth of products stranded in China. If Washington sees this as strategy, it's ignoring the smoke coming from its own engine, because when your supply chain is gasping and your exporters are collapsing, maybe it's not the other side that's blinking. In a joint declaration this spring, Russia and China confirmed what markets had already begun pricing in. Their bilateral trade is now almost entirely settled in yuan and rubles. That includes oil, gas, minerals, and high-value industrial goods. According to statements from both governments, the aim was to create a sustainable system protected against attacks from third countries, a clear reference to sanctions and currency dependency. As of April 2025, over 50% of China's total trade is conducted in non-dollar terms. And SWIFT data shows yuan usage and cross-border transactions jumped from 2% in 2021 to over 4.3% in Q1 2025. But the real shift isn't in payment systems, it's in confidence. A dollar is only as strong as the willingness to use it, and right now, Beijing and Moscow are building trade channels that can function without it. The next question is, who joins them next? A financial time bomb may already be ticking under the US dollar, and the detonator is $2.5 trillion deep. According to Eurozone and Stephen Jen, exporters in China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Malaysia have quietly accumulated more than $2.5 trillion in dollar reserves since 2020. That reserve pool is now unstable. Following the US-Taiwan trade talks, the Taiwan dollar spiked 8% in 48 hours, its largest move since 2007, and triggered synchronized currency strength across Asia. The ICE dollar index dropped 9% in 2025, and traders are bracing for what Jen calls a non-linear sell-off, where multiple countries dump dollars simultaneously to avoid being the last one holding a devaluing asset. But this isn't just currency speculation, it's a structural signal, with the Fed expected to cut rates by 75 basis points this year, and dollar assets already overvalued. Asian central banks now face a simple question: unload quietly or get crushed in the rush. The answer may rewrite America's global financial role. And that fallout hasn't even started. In Massachusetts, WS Gameco had $500,000 worth of merchandise stranded in Chinese ports, then lost $16 million in U.S. retail contracts in 1 quarter. In Oklahoma, 4K9 saw Tariffs destroy its ability to import dog seat covers despite growing demand. Lisa McDonald's Tea House in Michigan, which imports premium leaves from China, says she's weeks away from pricing herself out of her own market. All 3 cases come from different industries, but share the same plea: help isn't coming. These aren't giant corporations, they're lean, resilient American brands being outpaced by a policy machine that won't return their calls. Trump's tariff policy is hitting smaller firms the hardest. Unlike multinationals with diversified supply chains, local businesses can't root decades-old sourcing strategies overnight. And while Besant insists the US is still the premier destination for global capital, mom-and-pop shops are going under before that capital ever reaches them. So what happens when the economy Washington is trying to protect can't survive its protection? Even if a deal is struck, the tariff doesn't go away. According to White House trade officials and direct comments from Besant at the Millen Institute, Trump is committed to a permanent 10% baseline tariff on all imports, even from allies. That framework doesn't just punish adversaries, it embeds cost into the entire U.S. supply chain. The Kiel Institute estimates that this strategy will cause U.S. exports to fall by 17%, with American producers absorbing the difference or losing market share. In contrast, China and its trading partners expect only a 5% decline in exports, easily offset by their lower cost base and willingness to operate on thinner margins. This means the country pushing hardest for trade realignment is also the one making its goods least competitive. And with tariffs now priced into everything from manufacturing components to consumer goods, the very industries meant to be protected are being priced out of global relevance. But what if this isn't about economics anymore? What if it's about signaling strength regardless of cost? If China walks, Wall Street could follow, and so could the dollar. If Chinese consumers decide to stop buying American goods, the impact will be immediate and brutal. In 2024 alone, the US exported over $140 billion in goods and $46 billion in services to China, supporting nearly 900,000 direct US jobs. California alone exports $15 billion annually, with Texas pushing over $21 billion. But the larger risk isn't just to exports, it's to the markets. According to S&P Global, U.S. companies generate 7% of their annual revenue from China. If those earnings vanish, so do forecasts, dividends, and investor confidence. And when Wall Street bleeds, the dollar limps. International demand for US equities and treasuries depends on perceived growth and stability. Strip away Chinese consumers, and you don't just crash a few earnings reports, you tilt the entire asset ecosystem. Investors don't wait for official statements. They run at the first sign of contagion. So the real question becomes, can the US keep its currency dominant while making its biggest trading partner walk? This isn't just a tariff war. It's a coordinated unraveling of the post-1990s trade consensus. And the data shows we're past the tipping point. China has rerouted its exports, decoupled its currency flows, and tripled down on yuan-based settlements. Russia has cut out the dollar entirely. Asia's exporters are preparing for a dollar exodus. And while the US insists its markets are still open, its tariff regime says otherwise. Small businesses are collapsing, Wall Street is exposed, and the dollar is wobbling under the weight of policies designed to look tough, but which may prove strategically fragile. So ask yourself, if the dollar no longer anchors global trade, does America still anchor global power? And what happens to every American business, loan, and investment riding on the assumption that the dollar will always win? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Talking about this, GE confirming just now it is cutting 12,000 jobs as it shrinks its power. You're already seeing it, aren't you? It's already starting to impact your business very much so, but he also just made an announcement of an expansion of the existing 25% tariffs that were imposed on steel. Those will now be doubling, according to the president. Just now, I want to bring in a move that has shocked the American industrial landscape. General Electric has announced it will shut down several US factories and move production overseas. Coming from one of the most iconic manufacturing giants in US history, this decision marks a turning point in the nation's economic narrative. At the center of this shakeup is President Trump's aggressive tariff policy, which aims to protect American industry, but now faces unexpected consequences as trade tensions escalate. GE's retreat raises urgent questions about the actual cost of music protectionism. Is this a sign of strategic adaptation in a globalized economy, or the beginning of a broader unraveling of US industrial power? The announcement by General Electric to close multiple manufacturing plants across the Midwest and Northeast has sent a deep tremor through America's industrial heartland. These facilities were not just centers of production, they stood as symbols of American innovation, strength, and middle-class prosperity for decades. With machines powered down and assembly lines falling silent, thousands of workers face an uncertain future. The company's decision to move operations abroad signals more than a business adjustment. It reflects a seismic realignment of supply chains that no longer consider the United States a competitive production base under current conditions. Once synonymous with American manufacturing excellence, General Electric is shifting significant parts of its operations to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. These regions offer lower labor costs and more favorable tariff structures in the current global trade environment. The company has made clear that this is not a temporary relocation. This long-term strategy aims to redesign its supply network to withstand political instability, trade disputes, and rising domestic production expenses. While cost efficiency is a clear driver, the scale and permanence of this shift suggest deeper structural concerns. GE executives have indicated that the current US industrial climate makes it nearly impossible to maintain competitive pricing. As countries worldwide offer aggressive incentives and tax shelters to attract manufacturing investments, American factories are increasingly left behind. As a result, GE is prioritizing geographic regions that promise flexibility, cost control, and streamlined logistics. The company's move also reflects a changing calculation in the global economy. The days when industrial powerhouses needed to centralize production within one country have ended. Multinational corporations now favor decentralized models where production is closer to raw materials, labor markets, and end users. G's restructuring shows how even iconic American firms must respond to global forces that outweigh traditional patriotic or political considerations. Critically, this shift is part of a broader pattern. Over the last 5 years, many companies have quietly relocated manufacturing hubs to countries with fewer regulatory hurdles and lower operational costs. However, G's decision stands out due to its size, legacy, and symbolic weight. It signals to other corporations that the cost-benefit calculus has reached a tipping point. If even GE cannot sustain its industrial footprint in the United States, smaller firms may find it even more challenging to survive. The move has also ignited concerns among local communities that depended heavily on GE facilities. Towns built around these plants are bracing for job losses, declining tax revenue, and weakening local economies. Mayors and state officials are scrambling to propose tax incentives or reskilling programs to prevent economic collapse. But many recognize that these efforts may be too little, too late. Beyond economic disruption, the psychological impact on American identity is profound. General Electric has long been part of the national story. Its factories represented more than jobs. They were pillars of dignity, discipline, and stability. The closure of these plants is a symbolic fracture in the belief that American industry, once lost, can be restored through policy slogans or political will. This moment also brings into focus the global competition for manufacturing dominance. As GE packs up its equipment and begins operations overseas, it hands over technological processes, supply contracts, and regional expertise to foreign partners. These assets do not just represent financial capital. They carry knowledge, systems, and leverage that could shift the balance of economic influence. In the long term, the departure of major manufacturing infrastructure from U.S. soil weakens America's strategic autonomy in sectors deemed vital for national resilience. G's transition is not just about escaping higher domestic costs, it is about adapting to a world where production must be mobile, scalable, and shielded from policy volatility. As industries evolve under pressure from automation, geopolitics, and shifting consumer markets, firms like GE make decisions that redefine where and how the next generation of goods will be built. For now, the lights in many GE plants are going out, but the questions sparked by this decision are only beginning to surface. Behind closed doors, General Electric spent months exploring every financial and operational strategy that could keep its American factories alive. Company leaders examined multiple pathways to stay rooted on U.S. soil. They considered streamlining production lines, investing in automation, reducing shift hours, and renegotiating labor contracts. Every option was modeled with advanced forecasting tools and tested through detailed cost simulations. These efforts, however, met the same conclusion. None of the internal scenarios offered a viable path to sustain profitability under the current economic climate shaped by global inflation and targeted tariffs. In its cost optimization attempts, GE pursued aggressive automation initiatives. The aim was to reduce dependency on manual labor while increasing production speed. Robotics and innovative factory systems were introduced in test plants, promising greater efficiency. At the same time, management engaged in complex negotiations with labor unions. They proposed contract revisions that included temporary pay freezes, revised health benefits, and longer shift rotations. While some concessions were achieved, they fell short of offsetting the sharp increase in raw material prices and logistics costs. Beyond labor and automation, GE evaluated the consolidation of supply chains and the downsizing of non-core operations. Managers worked through frameworks that analyzed facility-level productivity and maintenance costs. Some smaller plants were proposed for closure, while others were considered for conversion into specialized hubs. However, in every model, the final projection revealed consistent margin erosion. Tariffs on essential inputs like steel and semiconductors made balancing cost and quality expectations nearly impossible. Even proposals to collocate production and research in more tax-friendly states failed to reverse the trajectory. States offering favorable conditions lacked existing infrastructure or required expensive retooling that further stretched capital. Federal tax credits and subsidies for manufacturing were either insufficient or bound by restrictions that did not apply to GE's diversified product portfolio. Even proposals to collocate production and research in more tax-friendly states failed to reverse the trajectory. States offering favorable conditions lacked existing infrastructure or required expensive retooling that further stretched capital. Federal tax credits